At 04:12 a.m., the radar room aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford came alive. A faint signal appeared, fast, high, and heading straight toward the carrier. The watch officer stared at the screen, confused at first. Then the alarm screamed through the decks. "Inbound missiles, bearing east!" Within seconds, the calm of the early dawn turned into chaos. 5 blips moved closer, closing the distance at over 7,000 kilometers per hour. Every second meant life or death. The crew rushed to battle stations. On the horizon, faint orange trails sliced through the dark sky. 5 Chinese anti-ship missiles were on their way. At 04:14 a.m., the first missile entered detection range. Sailors shouted commands, systems locked. The ship's Aegis defense system came online. "SM-6 ready to fire!" The captain gave the order. Moments later, the deck shook from the force of defensive missiles launching upward. The battle for survival had begun, and it was only the first minute. What happened over the next 10 would be recorded as one of the most shocking naval events in modern history. Before we dive deeper into the full story, the strike, the response, and the hidden aftermath, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and press the bell icon. Stay with us till the end to hear how one U.S. carrier stood against hypersonic fire and what the Pentagon never expected to see on its radar screens that morning. For months before the attack, the South China Sea had been a region filled with quiet tension. U.S. intelligence satellites recorded constant Chinese military movements near disputed islands. Radar stations, missile launch sites, and warship patrols increased every week. Washington called it strategic pressure. Beijing called it territorial defense. The world called it dangerous. In late June 2025, the United States launched Operation Pacific Shield, a naval deployment meant to show strength and stability in the region. At its heart was the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built. It was a floating city of power, carrying over 4,500 personnel, 75 aircraft, and 2 nuclear reactors. Alongside it sailed the destroyers USS Preble and USS Rafael Peralta, the cruiser USS Antietam, and several support vessels. Together they formed Carrier Strike Group 9, one of America's strongest naval forces. The Ford was more than just a ship. It was a message. It represented U.S. presence, protection of trade routes, and commitment to allied nations like Japan, the Philippines, and Australia. For weeks, the carrier group operated near the Spratly Islands, conducting flight drills and surveillance missions. Fighter jets, FA-18 Super Hornets and F-35C Lightning IIs, launched daily, practicing air superiority tactics. The crew grew used to routine. The ocean was calm. But under that calm, something else was moving. Chinese satellites tracked the carrier's every motion. High-altitude drones, invisible to radar, passed above the fleet. Chinese warships shadowed the group from a distance, always just outside engagement range. The U.S. Navy monitored them, but kept radio silence. There was tension, but no shots fired. Not yet. By early July, intercepted communications from Chinese military bases on Hainan Island showed new activity. Missile transporters were seen moving toward coastal positions. Analysts at the Pacific Command headquarters in Hawaii flagged it as unusual but non-aggressive. The Ford's intelligence team received the warning but remained on standard alert. No one expected an attack. At 03:45 a.m. on July 9, 2025, the carrier's crew prepared for another routine flight operation. The flight deck buzzed with maintenance crews checking FA-18s for a morning sortie. The sea was quiet, and dawn was just beginning to glow faintly in the east. Deep inside the ship, engineers monitored the nuclear reactors. Radar teams ran system checks. The smell of coffee filled the command deck. It was a normal morning. At 04:00 a.m., a faint signal was detected, a moving object high above mainland China, climbing rapidly. Within minutes, 4 more followed. The radar officer double-checked the coordinates. The speed was abnormal, faster than any commercial flight and higher than normal drones. He made the report to the bridge. Possible ballistic launches detected. The captain ordered confirmation from regional radar networks. Silence. Then, as data streamed in from satellites, the truth became clear. 5 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles had been launched directly toward the South China Sea. No one on the USS Ford spoke for a moment. Every officer knew what that meant. The carrier killers were coming. The DF-21D was designed for one purpose: to destroy large naval targets from thousands of kilometers away. Its hypersonic re-entry speed made interception nearly impossible. Even the best missile defense systems could fail against it. The captain ordered immediate battle stations. Sirens wailed through the decks. Lights turned red. Every sailor moved with trained precision. Above, FA-18 scrambled to clear the flight deck, but there was no time. The missiles were minutes away. The carrier group formed a defensive line, with destroyers activating their Aegis combat systems. Each second brought them closer to impact. By 04:12 a.m., the first radar confirmation arrived. The missiles were now 300 kilometers away and closing fast. The calm dawn of the South China Sea was about to become a battlefield. At 04:17 a.m., the first missile warning reached the bridge. 5 incoming targets descending at hypersonic speed, each traveling faster than Mach 10 or more than 12,000 kilometers per hour. The Chinese DF-21D missiles had entered their terminal phase, diving toward the U.S. carrier strike group. The captain of the USS Gerald R. Ford gave the order. All ships, defensive fire authorization granted. The battle had begun. Within seconds, the destroyers USS Preble and USS Rafael Peralta fired their SM-6 interceptor missiles. Bright streaks shot into the sky, curving toward the oncoming blips. Combat information centers filled with voices, tracking data, altitude calls, impact predictions. Interceptor 1 tracking, impact in 5 seconds. A silent pause, then cheers. 1 Chinese missile vanished from the radar, but 4 remained. At 04:19 a.m., a second wave of SM-6s launched. 2 more enemy missiles were hit, their debris falling into the sea hundreds of miles away. For a moment, hope returned. But then came the shock. The last 2 missiles broke formation, dropping altitude fast, performing evasive maneuvers. These weren't ordinary ballistic weapons. They were maneuverable re-entry vehicles, new versions capable of dodging interceptors. The Ford's radar struggled to track both at once. 1 missile turned toward the USS Antietam, the other kept its course toward the Ford. The Aegis system recalculated, preparing the final layer of defense, the CIWS, or Close-In Weapon System. At 04:21 a.m., the first missile slammed into the sea just meters off the Antietam's port side. The explosion sent a massive wall of water over the deck, knocking sailors down but sparing the ship from a direct hit. A near miss, but still enough to damage communications and radar. The crew fought to regain control. The second missile was seconds away from the Ford. Alarms echoed. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" shouted the officer. The CIWS opened fire, sending hundreds of rounds per second into the approaching streak. Tracers lit the dawn sky like lightning. At 04:22 a.m., the missile hit. It struck the carrier's starboard side near the waterline, tearing through reinforced steel. The explosion threw fire and smoke across the deck. Inside the ship, compartments sealed automatically. Fire suppression systems activated. Damage control teams rushed to contain the flames. Sailors worked in blinding smoke and rising heat. The ship trembled but stayed afloat. The carrier's nuclear reactors remained stable, a miracle of design and training. At 04:23 a.m., a second blast shook the formation. Debris from the earlier near miss struck a refueling aircraft on the Ford AS deck, igniting jet fuel. Flames spread quickly. The crew formed a human chain, carrying extinguishers, sealing hatches, and pulling wounded shipmates to safety. The noise was deafening. Alarms, explosions, and shouted orders blending into chaos. By 04:25 a.m., the U.S. Navy retaliated. The destroyers locked onto coastal radar signatures near Hainan Island, the launch origin. Dozens of Tomahawk cruise missiles roared into the air, heading west. Within minutes, Chinese radar sites were engulfed in smoke and static. The Ford's communication systems flickered. Satellite links were restored, and messages reached Pacific Command. The first report was short and grim. USS Ford hit. Battle damage under control. Returning fire. As the sun broke the horizon, the sea shimmered with smoke and floating debris. Helicopters lifted off to search for wounded sailors in the water. The Ford, scarred but still standing, turned slowly into the wind. Fighter jets scrambled for air patrol, ready for whatever came next. In less than 10 minutes, the most advanced carrier group in the world had faced one of the most dangerous missile systems ever built. It was not a war yet, but it was a warning. The U.S. Navy had survived the first wave. What followed would test every skill, every system, and every ounce of resolve they had left. The Chinese missile used in the attack was the DF-21D, known worldwide as the carrier killer. It is a medium-range, anti-ship ballistic missile designed specifically to target large vessels like aircraft carriers. With a range of over 1,500 kilometers, it can be launched deep within mainland China and still reach moving targets at sea. What makes it deadly is its speed and precision. During the final phase of flight, the warhead separates and re-enters the atmosphere at Mach 10, or about 12,000 kilometers per hour, adjusting course mid-flight using radar and infrared guidance. This gives defending ships only seconds to react. The U.S. Navy AS main defense against such missiles is the Aegis Combat System, a computer network that connects the radar, sensors, and missile interceptors of all ships in the group. It allows them to see the same threat picture and react together. The Aegis system can track hundreds of targets at once and guide Standard Missile 6 SM-6 interceptors to destroy incoming threats. These interceptors can travel at Mach 3.5 and strike targets up to 240 kilometers away. But the DF-21D's speed and unpredictable flight path pushed even Aegis to its limits. Each layer of defense, long-range interceptors, medium-range missiles, and the close-in guns must work in perfect timing. A single delay can mean disaster. In this attack, the U.S. defenses succeeded in intercepting 3 of the 5 missiles. The remaining 2 performed high-speed evasive maneuvers that confused radar tracking for a few seconds, just enough to slip through. Once the missile hit, the Ford's damage control systems activated automatically. The ship AS hull is built with double layers of hardened steel and flood control compartments to keep it afloat even after severe damage. Fire suppression foam systems sealed off the affected areas within minutes. Nuclear reactor readings showed no radiation leaks, proving the ship's internal safety design. Meanwhile, the destroyer's AN SPY-1 radar arrays continued scanning for secondary launches. Their computer algorithms filtered noise from real threats, searching for more missile plumes over Hainan Island. Electronic warfare teams began jamming enemy targeting signals, sending bursts of data to confuse Chinese radar operators. At the same time, the Ford's E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft were launched to create an airborne radar shield. Flying at high altitude, the Hawkeye's AN/APY-9 radar could detect missile launches from over 500 kilometers away. This airborne view allowed the task force to re-coordinate defensive formations and prepare for another strike. The Close-In Weapon System, CIWS, the last line of defense, had played a key role too. Each CIWS unit uses a 20mm Vulcan cannon that fires 4,500 rounds per minute, creating a wall of metal that shreds incoming missiles. It was this system that managed to slow the last missile before impact, reducing its penetration and likely saving hundreds of lives. Military analysts later explained why the strike succeeded partially. The DF-21D's new guidance software used AI-assisted tracking, allowing it to distinguish decoys from real ships. Its warhead included a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, MARV, that performed unpredictable zigzag motions. These capabilities made it harder for U.S. interceptors to predict the missile's exact path. The U.S. counterattack involved Tomahawk cruise missiles launched by the destroyers. Each Tomahawk can fly low at subsonic speeds for over 1,600 kilometers, guided by GPS and terrain maps. Their mission was to destroy radar stations and command centers responsible for the missile launch. Satellite images later confirmed multiple explosions near Chinese coastal batteries, suggesting at least partial success. Back aboard the Ford, the situation stabilized by 05 hours a.m. Engineers restored power to damaged sections. Medical teams treated over 60 injured sailors, many with burns and impact wounds. The carrier's air deck, though scarred and partially closed, still managed to launch a limited number of aircraft for patrol. It was a testament to American training and discipline. Every sailor knew their job, and every system had been built to survive. The attack also sent a signal across the world. Even the most powerful Navy was now vulnerable in the era of hypersonic warfare. Defense systems once thought unbeatable now faced a new kind of threat, one that moved too fast for human reaction and challenged the limits of technology itself. By 05:30 a.m., smoke still rose from the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. Fires had been contained, but the damage was visible from miles away. The starboard hull was dented and scorched, a massive gash marking where the missile had struck. The ship's communications arrays were partially disabled, and several FA-18s had been destroyed on deck. Yet the Ford was still afloat, still moving, and still operational. It had survived the most advanced missile strike in modern history. The first priority was survival. Damage control teams continued to flood compartments to cool the fire zones. Helicopters hovered above, lifting wounded crew to nearby medical ships. The final casualty report came in: 18 sailors dead, 67 wounded, and 4 missing. For a strike of that scale, the losses were devastating, but far less than what could have been. Many experts would later say that the Ford's survival changed the entire U.S. Navy's confidence in its newest carrier class. At 06 hours a.m., the Pacific Command issued an emergency alert to all U.S. naval units in the region. Defensive postures were raised to Combat Readiness Level 2, one step below full wartime alert. In Washington, the National Security Council held a closed-door meeting. Satellite images confirmed the missile launch sites on the Chinese coast. The Pentagon called it a premeditated act of aggression. Beijing, however, released a statement claiming it was a defensive measure, responding to what it described as provocative maneuvers by the U.S. fleet near disputed waters. The Chinese government denied any civilian casualties from the U.S. retaliatory Tomahawk strikes, but confirmed that several radar installations were destroyed. Around the world, reactions were instant. The United Nations called an emergency session. Stock markets in Asia dropped sharply. Oil prices surged overnight. U.S. allies, including the United Kingdom, Australia, and Japan, expressed full support for Washington. NATO headquarters in Brussels declared the incident a threat to maritime freedom. In the United States, media outlets broadcast footage of the damaged carrier returning to safer waters. Families of sailors waited anxiously as reports of the attack spread. Military analysts discussed what many called the first real test of the hypersonic age. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted overnight. At 07:30 a.m., the USS Ford regained full propulsion and began moving south under escort. The carrier's reactors were undamaged, and temporary communication links were restored using satellite relays. The strike group reformed around the Ford, maintaining defensive distance. Every radar remained active, scanning for any sign of a second wave. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon raised the global defense level to DEFCON 2, the second highest alert status, a level not seen since the Gulf War. Fighter jets across Guam, Okinawa, and the Philippines were scrambled for continuous air patrol. Submarines armed with ballistic missiles repositioned in the Pacific. No one declared war, but everyone knew how close it had come. One miscalculated response, one misunderstood radar signal, could have triggered a regional or even global conflict. Both nations issued stern statements, yet avoided direct threats. The world watched, waiting for who would make the next move. The U.S. Navy soon announced that the Ford would return to Yokosuka, Japan, for emergency repairs. The official report described the attack as a surprise strike using new generation hypersonic systems. Analysts within the Department of Defense admitted privately that the DF-21D had proven far more effective than expected. But they also emphasized that the Ford's survival showed the strength of American training, technology, and discipline under fire. In just one morning, 5 missiles had turned the calm waters of the South China Sea into the center of global attention. The incident would become a symbol of both technological danger and human resilience. When the sun rose fully over the South China Sea that morning, the ocean looked calm again. But beneath that calm was a deep mark, one left not only on steel, but on strategy, pride, and history. The USS Gerald R. Ford, once the symbol of untouchable U.S. naval power, had faced the most advanced missile technology in the world and survived. Yet the message was clear. The age of modern warfare had changed forever. For decades, aircraft carriers were seen as the kings of the sea, massive, powerful, and nearly unstoppable. But the dawn attack showed that even giants could bleed. Hypersonic weapons had rewritten the rules. Battles were no longer about fleets meeting head-to-head. They were about who could strike first, faster, and from farther away. It wasn't about bravery alone. It was about data, timing, and milliseconds. In the hours after the attack, engineers and analysts worked tirelessly to understand what went wrong, what worked, and what could be improved. The Ford's survival was a success of training and design, but it was also a warning. If 5 missiles could nearly destroy a $13 billion carrier, what would happen in a full-scale conflict? Defense experts began calling it the 10-minute war. 5 missiles, 10 minutes. And the world nearly changed. For the first time, U.S. commanders had to face the reality that technology might now favor the attacker more than the defender. Every fleet, every base, every city was now within reach of hypersonic fire. Still, amid the fear, there was pride. The crew of the Ford had held the line. They proved that human courage and teamwork still mattered in the digital age. Their calm under pressure prevented a total disaster. Their discipline kept the reactors stable. Their coordination stopped fires, saved lives, and ensured the ship kept moving. It was the spirit of the U.S. Navy, strength through unity, resilience through training. By the time the carrier reached Yokosuka for repairs, it carried more than battle scars. It carried a lesson, one that every nation would study for years. The next war, if it came, wouldn't start with armies crossing borders. It would start silently, with radar screens lighting up and missiles cutting through the sky before anyone could speak. That morning, as the smoke cleared and the Pacific glowed under the rising sun, one truth echoed across the world. Power alone was no longer enough. Precision, speed, and intelligence would decide the future of warfare. And for those who served aboard the Ford, that truth had been written in fire, steel, and courage. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more real-world military stories, deep breakdowns, and untold moments from the front lines of modern warfare. Stay alert, stay informed, and remember, peace is built not just by strength, but by the wisdom to use it.